You're listening to Fueled, a Fenstermaker podcast, and I'm your host, Catherine Fenstermaker. Before we start, I want to give everybody an idea of who you are and your role here, so I'm going to read your quick bio. Jeanne Arceneaux Hornsby is a professional engineer and director at Fenstermaker with 15 years of numerical modeling, water resource engineering, planning, and project management experience. Mrs. Hornsby earned her Master's of Science degree in hydraulic and environmental engineering from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette under the direction of Dr. Ehab Meselhe and Dr. Emad Habib. Currently, Mrs. Hornsby leads Fenstermaker's water resources team throughout the company's offices in Lafayette, Baton Rouge, Lake Charles, and New Orleans, Louisiana. Her main responsibilities include leading multi-million-dollar projects that range from coastal and watershed modeling and management to roadway design and construction for both the public and private sectors. She has obtained her experience and expertise by working on projects in Louisiana, Texas, and Florida, with the majority of her hydrologic and hydraulic modeling experience focused on Southwest Louisiana, specifically the Vermilion, Teche, Mermentau, and Calcasieu watersheds. As a certified floodplain manager, Jeanne assists many area communities in flood mitigation project funding through the use of available grant programs. She also assists communities in drafting flood protection and drainage ordinances, as well as leading participation and renewal activities in the FEMA Community Rating System. Jeanne was raised and currently resides with her family in Lafayette Parish. Jeanne, you have such a vast range of competencies for this podcast season on infrastructure. If you don't mind, I'd like to focus in on your dealings with and knowledge of drainage infrastructure components and its correlation to hydrologic modeling, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so just launching into it, and I'll say that I want to give a shout out to your team who also submitted questions for this podcast episode. I usually have a couple of things that I'm curious about and then reach out to your team, so they submitted questions as well. So I'm grateful for their input there. I'm personally intrigued by what all might be encompassed when making reference to hydraulic engineering. So it's my understanding that this is sort of a niche application of civil engineering. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So hydraulic engineering basically covers the flow of water, whether it's through a channel or a piped system. So we often study hydraulics through the use of hydraulic modeling, in which we replicate the system and can run various scenarios. It is a niche, but one of the things I've always been fascinated with the hydraulic side of things was that pretty much no matter which civil project you look at, whether it's a bridge or a roadway or even site civil, there's always an element of hydraulics in there. And I like that because I always get to participate and be a part of bigger projects, and I'm a piece of it. So that's one of the things that I've liked about hydraulic engineering.
So it's kind of like the underpinning to any like structural decision.
Yes. So there's always, you're building a building. How high does it need to be so it doesn't flood? Roadway, we designed the bridges that cross channels, the culverts, all of those different elements are part of it. And so as a hydraulic engineer, I get to participate in those different pieces.
So most people, whenever they think of infrastructure, and I can speak to my own knowledge of it, probably immediately think of roads and bridges. And so while roads and bridges are significant for transportation, there are other critical components of infrastructure that you work with. So firstly, can you tell us about the importance of drainage infrastructure and how that supports the health of transport systems?
Sure. So drainage right now is definitely the hot topic. Everybody's talking about it these days and has a focus on it. I always relate drainage to almost a quality of life. People on their day-to-day activities, if a road floods, we can't get to work or you can't get to your kids at school, your home. Often I hear when people's houses are flooded, thunder freaks them out and they get a lot of anxiety. So it's interesting because I feel drainage is part of our infrastructure, but it's one of the big ones that impacts our true quality of life for people. So I think it's important when we think drainage that we look at that as definitely one of the perspectives. So
Yeah, and mentioning that personal aspect of it too, that infrastructure is not just the structure, it's how it impacts the community as well.
Yep.
So, what types of funding sources are used for drainage infrastructure projects?
So generally, drainage projects are usually funded through your municipality or your government agencies, and that's usually around here a tax base. The other large funding component, sadly, is usually natural disaster driven. We usually don't see a lot of funding going towards drainage projects before in preparation. We see it after the fact. 2016 storms were a big event, and a lot of money is coming to the state from the federal level. So we go through a lot of grant applications. We have to go through many steps to get money, which is a lengthy process. And so that is a hurdle when it comes to drainage funding. But similar to other infrastructure, a lot of it is paid for through your tax base.
Okay.
Yep.
That's kind of sad that the funding is more reactionary.
Yeah, we're not proactive enough. It's more reactive. There are some funding mechanisms in the federal government for proactive base, and I'm looking at, I'm seeing more states going to being more proactive, but we are in response to an event that happened.
Right.
So, it's an interesting take, but we are dependent on those federal grants to fund a lot of our bigger projects.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are the most challenging issues associated with drainage improvement projects? That sounds like a loaded question.
Yeah, I know, right? So some of our challenges when we approach a drainage project, similar to a lot of other infrastructure, right-of-way is definitely a big issue. Everybody's like, clean my channel behind my house. Well, a lot of our regulations from zoning and policy have allowed people to literally build their homes and their fences on the edge of a channel or a lateral. And so it makes everything from widening that channel to maintaining it quite difficult. Similarly, funding, having the money available to do the projects that we need is definitely a struggle and a challenge that we face. And again, going back to the being proactive or reactive, a lot of times we're the afterthought, It's like after the storm, let's do a drainage project. So I think that is one of our bigger challenges that we see in the drainage side of things.
Okay. Can you tell us how you communicate with other types of engineers or what you wish other disciplines knew about yours, be they structural, transportation, geotechnical, or whatever their area may be? It's my understanding that infrastructure projects should be designed as a system, but they can unfortunately become isolated designs sometimes. So what do you wish that they knew? What do you wish that they would consider in their design?
Yeah, like you mentioned, pretty much all projects, have multiple elements. One of the things is we're often, as the hydraulic side, pulled in last into those projects. Under a contract, they're asking you to build a road or build me a building or, one of these different elements, change out that bridge. That's what the contract says. But we're often the afterthought. If we're involved as early as possible, we can work so that when we lay out a roadway alignment, let's place it on a ridge. Let's place it where it has the least amount of impact to the natural flow of water. Getting us involved, we can answer that. Even, oil and gas, a well site, we can move a well pad over 20 or 50 feet and no longer have to go through the floodplain permitting process or have an impact to the natural system. So having an early involvement in a project, I think is key. I'm a big proponent of early planning, getting in from the beginning and sitting there and looking at all the components. But so many times I'm called in after the fact and saying, oh, hey, I need to do a no-rise. Well, they've already bought the piece of property. They've already laid out everything. And when I say you need a bigger pond, I throw a wrench in things. So early involvement.
Break, what is a no-rise?
So a no-rise certificate is in the FEMA world. We don't want to impact our floodplain. Okay. So today, for a certain storm event, such as the 100-year, the water surface gets up to a certain point. Well, if I go and I build in that area and I take up volume, the water's going to go up. Think of it dropping an ice cube into a glass of water. So what the no-rise does, you're basically offsetting that displacement of fill somewhere else. So typically if we fill in a location, we'll dig a pond right next to it to balance those two pieces out. And we call it a no rise because the idea is that you should have no rise or no change in that water surface. You don't want to hurt your neighbor. That's the bottom line.
So that's why we see a lot of like newer developments and things. They'll have this fancy kind of like ponds on the property. That's just sort of a
it kind of
like a cut fill balance.
It is. It kind of does two things. One is it does offset the amount of fill that they're placing. The other thing is that it holds the water back. And what they'll do is they'll put a small pipe so that it slowly discharges that water out, and rather than just letting it all run off. Because before we developed, it was maybe just a grassy area and that water got to soak into the ground. Well, now we added streets, rooftops, that water wants to get out fast. So we dig a pond, allow the water to route to that pond, kind of stay there until the other, the channel water surface goes down, and then it can go into the channel. So it just kind of holds it back.
I didn't realize it was controlling the flow as well. That's
it's
really interesting.
It's a delay system. So typical standards require you to, like, whatever originally was leaving that site from a flow standpoint, you can't make it anymore. So you have to hold it in order to let it go out slower. That's why they detention.
Well, so what is your role in the different phases of a project, from data collection to design and construction?
So, in working in hydraulics, I've done pretty much every piece. From data collection, we deal with a lot of data when we do hydraulic models, from LiDAR to GIS files, things like that. And then so once we gather our data, we'll go in and we like to do what we call a gap analysis. We don't like to just start something from scratch. Our government and people have paid to start pieces, and if we can build off of it, that's great. So we gather as much data as we can. We figure out where our gaps are. We'll collect survey. We'll generate a model that replicates that natural system as best as possible. And then we'll run different scenarios. We like looking at probability of things. What happens if I get a 100-year rainfall, but the Vermilion River is low, has a low stage. I could see the same impact if I get a 10-year rainfall, but the Vermilion River is high. So, we'll take that and we'll run different scenarios. From there, I'll look at feasibility. We'll start running feasibility of projects, determining which projects have the best benefit for what we're trying to solve. If maybe I've got a cluster of homes that have flooded. So we'll look and say which projects have the most benefit. We also make sure that whatever we're doing doesn't impact somebody downstream. Water moves, it's not something that I can take and just make it disappear. So ensuring that whatever project we implement helps somebody downstream. I often hear, just change. The problem is that culvert. The rails came through. One of the first things in our area was the railroad. So under the railroad are a lot of smaller pipes. Well, we've built on that. Well, everybody's like, look, just change that pipe out. Just make it bigger and we wouldn't flood anymore. But that just would move the water downstream, and those people downstream of the railroad, maybe it would increase their water surface and make them flood where they don't currently. So water moves around. We have to take that into account. So
just kind of looking at everything as very connected.
Yep. And, nowadays I've gone from being the modeler to now more overseeing the modelers on my team and doing project management. So that's kind of my data collection days have progressed more to project management and overseeing people and projects.
That must be a neat shift to kind of move from being so, I guess, in the weeds with it to like transitioning into more of a mentorship management perspective.
Yeah, it has. I have to say that, like, I give, complete recognition to my mentor, Dr. Ehab Meselhe. He came in and, he taught me how to model, but more, he taught me to look at the bigger picture. Determine what questions, is my client asking? How can the data be used? How do we relay that information to people? So that has been a fun transition of going from being the one, being behind the computer, running the models, to now being in front of the client and trying to explain to them the results, as well as like ways that they can utilize that to maybe enforce policy or put in projects and things like that. So
Most of your projects require significant interdepartmental communication and coordination with multiple government agencies. Is that challenging? I know that's probably definitely challenging. That's not even a question. But can you talk about how you navigate these challenges to meet all the rules and regulations while getting the projects done in a timely manner?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. No matter what project I touch, I feel that it even either has a component of FEMA or the Corps involved. And majority of my clients are government related. So involving everybody can be a challenge. One of the things I like to do is at the beginning, we sit down at the table, if I'm on a state highway, is DOTD involved? Who are the key players? Putting everybody, on the same page. What are we doing? I think that transparency has helped. Also, as I've gone through my career, establishing relationships. So establishing those relationships and them having, trusting that we're on the right path and that we're doing all the different steps. I like to know what steps I need to follow, and we'll go through them. So I think that's important and has made projects successful when you have multiple agencies involved. Bottom line, I tell a lot of my clients, these guys are involved. That does not mean something's going to get done quick. So having that up front and understanding the steps we have to go to is definitely an important part of making projects successful.
I feel like even, in my role here, a lot of my job consists of getting the right people at the table together, which sounds kind of like what you're talking about. It's just like making sure that all these different agencies have a seat at the table, have a voice in the project, and that you, like, being in charge of coordinating all of that is a lot of responsibility.
It is, and I've learned follow up. At the end of the day, I don't blame them. A lot of these government agencies, my project is not their only project, and it's not their top priority. For me and for my client, that is a top priority project. So it's up to me to set up recurring, whether it's a call or a meeting, so that we can all be on the same page and kind of hold each other accountable. I think that that's really important to the success.
Yeah, definitely. And following up.
Follow up.
You can't say it enough. You really can't. What have you found to be the most effective ways to engage and obtain meaningful input from the public and stakeholders regarding specifically drainage needs and improvements?
Honesty. I think honesty is at the forefront. A lot of times they hear political sides of things, but as the engineer, I feel that if I can be honest and truthful with them, that goes a long way. They then feel the trust. I mentioned trust earlier. I think honesty and trust, they go in hand, no matter if we're talking drainage, roadway projects, anything. As an engineer, being truthful. This is going to take 2 years. Being upfront with them, letting them know the timelines that we have, the obstacles that we have. I think a lot of times the frustration that I see from the public is that the lines of communication are not open.
Okay.
So if they know the challenges, they understand the hurdles, they're not always happy, but they at least have an understanding. So the more we can inform the public, the better. Another thing is we have been hosting, we did one actually last week, a town hall meeting.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, and the town halls are great, and it's not for people to just come in and have a mic and talk. But what we do is we set up stations where they go around, and yes, we want to hear from them. Tell me, where do you live? Do you flood? Do your streets flood? Tell me what you have. But then we also use it as an opportunity to inform them. We have set up, mock science fair projects so they understand how a detention pond works. What does it mean? I get the question all the time. If that wet pond, it already has water in it, how's that helping my neighborhood? And letting them understand that it's the volume on top of it that counts. And, the wet pond actually is an easier maintenance. We don't have to mow 3 acres of property, and we can also use it as an asset. So we use the town hall as an informative process. The one we just did, we did it at a school. We invited children. We had an area where they got to color, learn about the hydrologic cycle, learn about litter abatement, these different elements. We did a flashcard board where they could answer, they had a question, they flip it. One of them was like, what are the top 5 wettest cities in the U.S.? And Lafayette's actually number 5.
Wow.
So, a lot of people, that blew people away, and it makes them say, oh, I understand that. I know that's why we're having this, when you see statistically where we're at. So they really enjoyed that. We also took public comment on, what policies do they think would work in their city? Which programs can we implement? Where do they want to see projects? And then lastly, we went in and we informed them of what we've been doing. We showed them before and after, footage of some of the channels that have been cleaned. We've showed them the plan. This is where we're going to go next. This is how much money we have in the budget. This is how much this costs. So people really were receptive to this because they said, honesty. There was honesty there. We didn't tell them that this project was going to get done in 3 months when it's going to take 2 years. They liked the fact that they learned something. I had so many people tell me, like, I left today learning something I never even knew, So, and giving them the resources they need. A lot of times, FEMA has things. There's different companies that offer flood mitigation for a personal homeowner that they can help protect themselves. Similar to putting up plywood after a hurricane, before a hurricane, they can actually put barriers around their house and things like that. So we got them informed with those types of people. So again, I go back to honesty and people want to learn. They want to understand.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really an important piece.
It sounds like, in addition to being honest, that you and your team were extremely creative in that scenario to bring about all those different activities and things to include kids. And that just sounds above and beyond, but definitely at the same time so necessary and needed. So it doesn't sound like something that I would expect from, my engineering firm to come and put on basically a showcase. But that's really neat.
Yeah, and I'm finding more ways that I can involve, a lot of it stems from me being a mom, but involving children, because, they're the best sounding board. Kids will tell parents, don't throw that on the ground. They don't want it to litter because they learned in class that when you throw it on the ground, it washes into your channel and ends up in our river. So kids are fantastic, and we're looking to get more involved in with the schools and stuff like that for some of the other parishes that I'm working in. So I'm really excited about that. That's something that just really excites me.
Yeah,
they're our future generation. They're going to make it what it is. So let's teach them today.
Yes. Yep. Oh my gosh, I couldn't agree more. So your projects, I imagine, require you to work with extremely large amounts of data. And I've heard kind of tangentially just about, our server storage space and these terabytes that we're bringing in whenever we pull these massive data sets. But what types of data are you recording primarily?
So primarily we look at water level is pretty much the main things. We want to see how much does an area flood today. And like I said, looking at projects, how do they impact that water level. But in today's technology, we deal with large LIDAR grids. We deal with really long durations of data. We don't want to just look at major events like the August 2016 storm. We want to see what happened in these flash flood events. So we typically will take long durations of rainfall. We'll isolate storms that, we can calibrate our models on and that we can utilize for analysis. And we'll bring in radar and things like you see, just radar similar to what your meteorologist shows when you watch the weather. So we use all these different pieces. Land use data is huge for us. Also looking at statistics on how high have rivers gotten. Other things that we're dealing with right now are our future. What does the subsidence level look like today? And what do we predict it to be in 50 years? Sea level rise, we're seeing the impacts today. There's areas, in Iberia Parish that used to never see water, and it doesn't have to rain a drop. You get a wind and a high tide, and there's water in areas covering streets now. So we're seeing the impacts, and that data is important. We've got lots of agencies that are collecting this data, so we take it and we try and utilize it in our models, not just to look at what's going on today in our existing conditions, but we want to ensure that the projects that we're implementing and even policies and programs can benefit us in 50 years.
Yeah.
So that's another piece of data that we utilize as well.
That's even more than I had imagined. So that must require mastery of many different software programs for processing and analysis. What's your approach to managing and processing through such vast quantities of information?
Again, I go probably to upfront planning, when we start a project, and we've actually got some processes that we're working on and have some mastered, some change as we go, but everything from what are you going to name a file? We run 50 storm events to look at, how does a project impact various runs, like I was mentioning, various storms, like I mentioned earlier. So we'll package these up, and we try and be systematic of how we name things. We make sure everybody on our team is on the same level. There's great software now that lets you track versions of projects and things like that. So utilizing our technology that's out there, as well as good organization. So I've got team members that are phenomenal at organizing, and they keep us straight. So
that sounds like a coordination effort too, and communication definitely.
Yeah.
So beyond that, how do you keep up with the ever-changing, ever-evolving technologies that are required in all of this?
So that's always fun, because I feel like once we've mastered something, the next version comes out that's, makes it a little different. Or so one of the things we deal with, we work with the core software, HECRAS. Okay. It's recently, in the last few years, transitioned from being 1D to 2D. So, we've always, Fenstermaker for the last 25 years has done 2D modeling using other softwares. So we're taking the same modeling concept, but having to figure out the buttons to push. So here at Fenstermaker, we've done a great job of doing in-house training, formal training. So this helps us kind of get over those hurdles of setup. Basically, the more you use it, the more you'll learn the ins and outs.
Yeah.
One of the things I find is that as softwares are advancing, they're not actually making the core of it any different, but they're making the buttons easier to press. So they're making modeling easier to set up and easier to take and export the data, which sounds fantastic, but you have to understand what your model's producing. Making sure that the results, whether it's from flood extents or the graphs or what's going on inside, is operating properly, because they're making it so easy to punch the buttons right now. Some people get results and I see it and I'm like, okay, but does it make sense whenever we look at other events and things like that? So I think technology is great. We just have to make sure you know all the ins and outs of it.
Yeah, it feels like I'm constantly, just even in life and software updates for the phone and just different things, it's like we're constantly on this learning curve with technology. But it's a good place to be,
It is. And
better than left behind.
It is. And the next generation, they love it. They love it. And I guess I was that, the previous generation. As we keep going, I dug into pieces, and I'm seeing them dig into it and really understand it and show us how we can be more efficient, how we can utilize it. So a lot of great things with technology.
Yeah, and you mentioned the next generation. I know the engineering department does a great job of including internships and things like that. And actually, we're looking at doing communications-wise, like an old school versus new school, and kind of what have they learned from each other.
Yep.
So it seems like that's something that you're talking about. They're coming in, they're excited and enthusiastic about these newer technologies, and kind of sharing that enthusiasm and kind of passing it back and forth. So
yeah, their enthusiasm is definitely great, and they have a constant want to just make things better. How can we make the world better? How can we make things cleaner? How can we do things, differently? So I love it because it constantly challenges me. There's still sometimes the old way, let's just make it simple. We don't have to complicate it. But, their constant push to making us better is phenomenal, and it keeps me on my toes. So.
Yeah, well, that's awesome that you welcome that kind of thinking. That's definitely positive. How do you see engineers getting involved to solve our region's flooding issues?
As engineers, we definitely are gonna have to play a big part of this.
Definitely.
Whether it's serving on boards, getting involved with just the community through different groups, I think it's important that we speak up. One of the things I find engineers hold back their knowledge and their opinions a lot of times because we're at times concerned of liability issues and things like that. There's been so many times that I find engineers that unless we have every box checked, we're hesitant to make a recommendation. And then what happens is other people speak up who have less knowledge, who have less experience. So I think that's a hurdle for the engineering field right now that I think we're going to have to navigate. But I'd love to see engineers speak up and get more involved, both on the policy side of things, as well as right now the engagement just in drainage in general. There's all these groups that have formed. There's a lot of different, symposiums that are being held. Get involved, share your knowledge. I think we can definitely contribute.
Yeah, I think I heard a saying, the less informed someone is, the more likely they are to be highly opinionated and probably vocal too.
Yeah, and we have the knowledge and we have the technology in our engineering community. I feel for so many homeowners who go and buy a house or buy a piece of property and want to build a home. They go to their real estate agent, says you're not in a flood zone. Their mortgage company tells them they're not in a flood zone. Their permit agent tells them you don't have to build up, all the way to their actual insurance. They hear it from all these people and they think they're safe. They get a false sense of security because no one's told them otherwise. We have the knowledge. We have the technology. We need to do a better job of protecting people by identifying that risk. So I think that's definitely a place that engineers are going to need to play a part in closing that gap.
Well, it sounds like you're perfect to lead that charge. Can you talk a little bit about the Louisiana Watershed Initiative? I understand that we recently responded to the state's request for proposals. So are we prepared to take on this type of a project?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's in our backyard. Who better? We have the experienced staff. We've also done a great job of teaming with national partners to bring in lessons learned that they've experienced in other areas. I think this is a great opportunity for the state in general, but us as a team, we have the ability to promote the things that we know will work here, as well as we're the end user. When it's said and done, when models are created for the region and for the state, we're still here. We're the ones using those models to answer the questions. We also understand the complexities of our system. We understand what agricultural does to our watershed. We understand the impacts of coastal and the tide, like we were talking earlier, and subsidence. By having this understanding and also having the knowledge and the technology, we can blend those two together to make this successful. So I think this is a great opportunity for the state. I think this is a great opportunity for Fenstermaker, and I'm really, really excited about this initiative.
How big of a project is this, and how many years are we talking about for completion?
So what the Watershed Initiative includes, it's $1.2 billion of funding that has came from the federal government to the state of Louisiana in response to the storms of 2016. Locally here, we just think of the August 2016 storm, but there was actually some other events that occurred in March, I believe, of 2016. So this $1.2 billion is coming to the state. The state is looking to spend $100 million of that to study and do models. They want to set up models that can determine regional impact of projects, ensuring that what we do in one part of the watershed doesn't negatively impact the other. They are also looking to form commissions within each of these regions to help with the project identification, as well as looking and seeing if they can set baseline policies, which I think is extremely important. One of my passions is more of the policies and program side and making those changes. I think projects just one of those pieces. There's a lot of regulations within the 1.2 billion, so 50% has to be spent within 6 years, the whole 100% within 12. You can only spend it, a large portion of it has to be spent in the parishes that saw the damages from 2016. But what we're going after right now is the modeling part. That's the $100 million has been split between 7 regions. We're going after some of these regions to try and utilize our modeling experience and our local knowledge to promote the project. And I think it's a great piece for the state. Other states have, kind of charged this way, and it seems to be working, and I think is a great direction for us.
So you mentioned your passion is on the policy side of things. Can you think of in recent years or just at any time in your career where you've seen a significant shift in policy that maybe you were proud of or, I don't know, invigorated by?
Yeah, I really think in the last 20 years we've made huge leaps. It used to be that a development could come in and didn't have to do any detention. Okay. A home could just build a house and, it had to be at a certain BFE and that was it. Now we're adding a 1 foot freeboard, which is you build 1 foot higher than what the flood it would be at 100 for the 100-year storm. So as communities are adopting these additional regulations, it protects people. It protects our generations to come.
Yeah.
I think we still are a little bit behind on land use. I think we can do a better job of promoting buffers along channels. I think we can do a better job of identifying what I mentioned earlier, protecting all people, no matter what flood zone they are categorized by FEMA. If they have a flood risk, ensuring that they know how high that they need to build. I also feel that we need to utilize the latest and greatest data. There's quite a few municipalities and parishes that still utilize data from the 1970s for rainfall, where there's now newer data that's more accurate. So I think that there's steps in our policies. I am also a big proponent that I don't think we should just look at policies. I think we should have a good balance of policies and programs. Okay. So there should also be incentives that incentivize people who do more. Do they add more green space? Do they look at low impact development techniques and complementing the policies with the programs? I think that's the only way successful. It's the only way that it can be successful.
Yeah.
And projects aren't the saving grace of everything. If we don't start thinking differently, it's just going to be a revolving door of us being right back where we're at, because that project's going to reach its design life. Yeah. So I think those are important pieces.
Well, you definitely have really good insight on that. I'm glad that you have a voice in the community for it. So the Louisiana Watershed Initiative is a positive step, like you said, towards fixing our extreme flooding problems that we've been experiencing recently. How will the Watershed Initiative help with this problem? And you kind of already touched on this, but what else do you think that we can and should do?
So the Watershed Initiative, in my opinion, is the first time that we stop and make decisions based on science and data.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I know, right?
It makes sense.
Yeah. In the past, we would make decisions. We would use science and pieces, but we wouldn't look at the bigger picture. So it's the state working together as a whole. And not just as a state, but the state has actually even been pulling in our neighboring states, because water, we hear it over and over, water does not see jurisdictional boundaries. So I think that it's been a great push for that, to utilize science and data to select the projects and not politics. I think it is going to benefit us in the long run, for sure. There's a lot of people involved, and I'm really happy with the people sitting at the table coming forward. I mentioned earlier about engineers getting involved in the process, and I'm seeing them step up and kind of working together. So for the state, this is going to be a great move. It's going to be long. It's not going to be it's not going to be a quick journey. So I think we've got to definitely navigate through it, and there'll be some speed bumps along the way, but in the end, I think it'll be really good for the state. I can't wait for the headlines to read, Louisiana at the forefront of, floodplain management.
Oh, that'd be nice.
And watershed management. I think that would be nice. I want to be number one for once and not number 49th on that list.
Yeah, definitely.
So this gives us the opportunity to do that. So
yeah, that's nice and very encouraging. What do you suggest that someone in the general public who is not an engineer can do to help with these issues?
Be present. Be present in the process. A lot of days, today a lot of people take to social media to voice their opinions, and that's great, but it gets drowned a lot of times by everything else. We talk town hall meetings. There are town hall meetings. There are public meetings. This is difficult, I know, for some people to attend. We all have lives. We all have kids. But the more that you can get involved, the better. Utilize your politicians. They're there and they will listen. Utilize them as a sounding board for your thoughts and where you want to see things go. Unless you speak up, unless you're present, people aren't going to know your feelings. And a lot of times the people who are speaking up, you may not agree with. So, we want to hear both sides. I think it'll make us better. So the more you can get involved, that's actually the best route for success, is just being involved.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
It sounds simple enough. Just show up. Can you discuss the challenges and rewards that come from having been predominantly trained as a water resource specialist, now managing a team of engineers with such a broad spectrum of abilities and specialties? And I guess, in addition, can you talk about how you balance your roles as both engineer and manager?
Sure.
Or should I break that down? Should I break that down into two questions?
We can navigate.
Okay, you navigate
Let's navigate that.
All right.
So, when I went to school as an engineer, I think they teach all engineers to solve problems. So at the end of the day, we all have the same goal. We're here to solve problems. We're here to help people. And I think that's important as we navigate through anything. I focused in water resources, but I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of dynamics and a lot of pieces that I've gotten to participate in, and that's made me a stronger engineer.
Yeah.
When I go into a project, my past experience of working with that structural engineer or that roadway engineer make me see the bigger picture. So I think that's been definitely something that has helped. When working with my team, I like to see where people have strengths. Yeah. I have people that are more management focused or extremely organized. I have some people who love the details. I talked about the town hall. I have some people who love doing them and putting them together, and it's just it drives them. Other people, their driver is to complete a set of plans and see something constructed.
Yeah.
So, one of the focuses that I have is how can we make these people successful?
Yeah.
Because if they're successful, then we're all successful. If they like what they're doing, that's definitely been a challenge for me, because there's not always an opportunity to give everybody exactly what they want in life. But trying to figure out and look at each one of them and give them something that they're proud of. I think that's definitely something that has helped me to work with the different groups and, as I train people, teaching them the same thing. So
yeah, it seemed like it makes sense, just where people naturally shine, to just kind of find them a position to where they can shine.
Yep.
And listening to people and finding out what they're passionate about, and then something that might be a chore for one person,
Mm-hmm.
might be someone else's complete delight. So it seems like you're doing a good job of recognizing everyone's unique passions and then allowing them to express outwardly from there.
And I think, too, also looking at our clients, seeing our clients and what are they asking you for, or what do they have to work with. Some of our clients have very limited budgets. So giving the most that they can for what they can afford. I think that's definitely something, as working with my team, teaching them to look at your end user, try and figure out, can you give them what they're asking for? Can you give them more? What can you do to help them strategize to get the most out of what they can pay for? I think those are all definitely elements that have came together, and I'm trying to relay those to those that work with me, and I think they're doing a good job.
That's awesome. A lot of your projects seem to require you to be what I would refer to as being on. So that can be mentally draining. What do you do to manage your stress so that you can stay consistently focused on your projects and dedicated to your profession?
That's a good one, right?
It's like the ultimate challenge in life. Though,
I know.
right?
I'm managing stress. Oddly, work does not stress me. It's not. It doesn't. I enjoy what I do. I have a really easy on-off switch. My kids stress me out. My youngest one can definitely stress me. But for work, I don't think I stress, because I always look at one thing at a time, see what I can get done. My other piece is a very strong team. Having people that I can trust, that I know will carry their pieces, help me. They help to keep me organized. I'm running in circles, but they make sure that I'm at the right spot and doing the right thing, and they're preparing me for my next meeting. So a strong team helps that stress level. If you trust and you're working as a team, you can take a deep breath and sit back and enjoy it.
Yeah,
If you're stressed, you're not enjoying it. And I always look at things. I'm a very optimistic person. I feel things happen for a reason, and if that door doesn't open, it didn't open for a reason, and I need to just go to the next one. So I think that also helps with those pieces of managing stress. Now, home stress, I need to work on that one.
I think we all do and all can. And so finally, a closing question that I ask all of my guests in the spirit of the podcast Fueled. What fuels you just in general, in life, your career, work, family? What keeps you going?
So currently, I would say the thing that fuels me the most are my kids. And it's not just my kids, but it's the next generation. I have a great want of the what if and how can we make it better. And that's one of the things that definitely fuels me. I think if you ask my colleagues, though, they'll tell me, it's the drive of work. It's what's next. What can we do next? How can we satisfy our clients? It's more of the pride of doing good and doing great work. Yeah. I think that's my other driver. One part of me says it's my family and my kids and the next generation, but I also love what I do, and I think the work we do is great, so we can keep it going. It just keeps driving me more and more.
Well, I think that's a perfect closing for this podcast episode, and thank you so much for taking time to talk with me. I'll always learn whenever I talk to you, so I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Catherine. This was definitely fun.